Suzanne, do you want to take it away? I will gauge down for you.
Good. Good evening. My name is Suzanne Johnson, as was mentioned before. I'm the president of the Sugarland Ethno History Project. It was an organization that started in 1995 when Gwen Reese, who was the founder and president, started her work. Gwen passed away in July, so I've moved up to the position of president. The main reason for the project was to preserve the history and archaeological history of the Sugarland community, which is in Upper Montgomery County, Maryland. It started out as a group of former enslaved people who purchased land from the white landowners. They developed their town of Sugarland. It consisted of a church, a school, a post office, and a store. So they were very self-sufficient. They were very eager to help every family to grow. And they all worked together to make that happen. The church also has a cemetery, which is also being preserved by the project, which at the present time, we believe has about 340 ancestors there. Like I said, our purpose is to document the history of the community. Right now, it's housed in the church, which I believe you saw a picture of on the first slide. The church, that particular church was built in 1893, and it houses all of our artifacts, our documents, family histories, homegoing service programs, and lots of different things, so that when you come in, you'll be able to see and learn a lot about the people who lived in the community of Sugarland. I think I said that part already. Gwen, Tara, did you have our video, or can we show that?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, we have a short video and you'll get to meet Gwen. This was done shortly before she passed, and it's an excellent introduction to what the Ethno History Project is all about. Well, if you're ever on YouTube, there is a video that will feature our former president, Gwen Reese, and you can see her picture there off to the side. We also, back in 2020, were able to produce a book called I Have Started for Canaan, and it's all about the history of the Sugarland community. The map that you see there in front of you is what the community looked like around 1920, 1930. Right in the corner of the two rows there, you can barely see it. It says Methodist Church, and that's the part where, like I said, the church and the cemetery sits. The property directly beside that to the right is the Basil and Nancy Dorsey Site, which Tara is going to be talking with you. Yeah, there we go. A lot more. Everyone had between 2 and 6 acres of land. And like I said, helped people develop and grow as a group. Some of the first families you see there are, Nancy Dorsey is one of them. A lot of the others are all relations to people who grew up in the community, and it's part of where my maternal roots lie. Okay, Tara, did you want to go ahead next?
All right. Okay, so then when Suzanne and Gwen first had me out to the property and suggested that I take a look and see if I could test what they believed to be the old house. It started us on a process of doing the historic background research, as you typically do, and what we were able to draw out of this was, it was pretty tough. A lot of the records, particularly on the women, were just not there. But we broke the family's history into 3 different time periods, from 1874 to 1885, when Nancy and Basil raised their kids. And as they grew up and married and had their own kids, roughly from 1881 to 1900, they were grandparents, and we see records of the different children and grandchildren. And then from 1901 to 1909, they're basically empty nesters. Some of the families lived in the Sugarland community, and some of them lived in adjacent African-American communities. But you can see an image in the corner of the church. Other things we were able to pull out of the archival record. We know that Basil and Dorsey and Nancy Beckwith were each born about 1830. As a child, Nancy was enslaved to a woman named Mary Chiswell, who was up in a neighboring community called Poolesville. But then she gained her freedom and married Basil Dorsey. The couple had children between 1859 and 1868. They had 6 children. We know of 5 of them. So 5 from the oldest to youngest include Eliza, John, Mary, Elizabeth, and Margaret. And then during the Civil War, several of the men from Sugarland were recruited, gently persuaded, to join the Confederate side of the Civil War. So Basil, Luke Hebron, William Beckwith for sure. The couple, we believe that Nancy Dorsey was probably working for Jane Pleasance. Jane Pleasance owned land in Sugarland, but at the time her family was moving, and she was trying to get rid of the land, and she sold much of her land to African-American families who wanted to move into Sugarland. So we believe that that's where, Nancy Dorsey bought 4 acres from Jane Pleasance. But the point is that, the first deed was the land was owned by Nancy Dorsey. And we just thought this was great because there are so few women-owned properties unless you're a single woman in the 1870s. While they were allowed to own land by 1830, most states restricted women from owning property. So this was a great find to me. On their farm, they had the house, the community well, as well as the farm buildings, a huge garden, and an orchard in the back. They farmed pigs and chickens. And then as the kids got older, they took odd jobs in the community. And then, the family, were regular community members at the church, and they harvested together, they planted together, and they worked, families within the Sugarland community really made a big effort to plant and harvest together so that they could just make sure that everybody had food for the winter. And it's just one of the things I love about their history. So what did we find at the Dorsey House? When I first met Gwen and Suzanne, I met them at the church, and they took me out to find 4 large support stones in the woods, one of which you see in the corner. And at the time they said, well, this is what we believe to be the Dorsey's house. And I said, well, do you have pictures of the house or photographs of the people? And they said, no, we don't have any pictures at all. Gwen, I believe, mentioned, there is mention of a house in Tillman Lee's 1970 interview. And so in the interview, we were able to pick up little pieces about the house. For example, there were 2 bay windows and a sash window in the front of the house. We learned that the front door was on the side of the house, that there were 2 rooms in the house, a small attic, but used only for storage, not for bedrooms. So they built an addition in the back for a bedroom and an additional kitchen room or something. But, we were able to pick up little tidbits like that as we went along. Looking at the archaeology and artifacts excavated from the house. Again, we went back to Tillman Lee's interview, because he described in great detail where, excuse me, where the stove was. And I wrote the quote in red in the corner. So he, talks about what type of, that there was a clay pipe, it ascended from the ceiling. He talks about, he gave us a general idea of where the stove was. So we knew where to put test units, or we could guesstimate where to put test units to hopefully find some evidence of the stove and cooking portion of the kitchen. The other interesting thing to me, and I had heard this from different people who had done the historic background research in the community, that all of the houses in the community had wood floors. And so that was even mentioned in his interview, if you read the little quote on the side. But so what did we find in terms of artifacts? Well, we put 2 test units in that center. We had already put in a test unit in an adjacent area, and one over along the edge of the wall, where we also found kitchen, food consumption and serving items. But the artifacts here in the slide are just meant to give you a taste of what was found. I was sort of expecting to find different types of ceramics. We really didn't. We found ginger bottles, but in terms of food consumption and serving ceramics, it was either the stoneware or ironstone. No white and green, no other, whiteware, maybe one piece of whiteware or 2, but nothing else. No, occasional pearlware that was left over or something like that. We did find the clear medicinal bottle at the bottom of the slide. Several pieces of this stoneware jug that you see in that picture, as well as the clear and our aqua colored bottles, which could be used for either liquor or water. And then in each of the units, we found these long iron tools that were supposedly there to stoke the fire or pull pans out. And the wire attachments, these are items that are used to, you would use to put a curtain up around a cabinet. And that was a pretty popular thing to do for a long time throughout the 20th century. The ginger bottles were very popular. We found ginger bottles all over the site. So I put an image of that in the top of the slide. But to me, the most fun part was to find the coin. I've been an archaeologist for a long time. I've never found a coin. So that was really fun. But it was found underneath the floorboards, about where those stones were in the picture. And which says to me it was either dropped during when it was built, or it fell through the floorboards. Take your pick. But it was a nice find, anyways. And moving to the back of the house, then we isolated basically 2 general areas. One had more artifacts that said socializing, entertaining, relaxing, personal space, and the other one said spoke more about a personal space, such as where you found a lot of clothing artifacts, like the brass button that you see in the bottom slide, or the small buckle that you see in the bottom slide. I mean, it wasn't all clothing objects by any means. It was definitely a mixed use space, but I was surprised at both the large and small artifacts, clothing artifacts, and buttons and shoe buckles and things like that, or overall buckles. And to me, it was really exciting because the small ones, spoke more to me about child-sized clothing and child-sized shoes, which I've, until recently in the archaeological literature, people just weren't speaking as much about child things. So that to me was pretty interesting. On the top of the slide, there's a picture of the kaolin pipe fragments found on the opposite end of that house, or the opposite corner. The bracelet, we also found a single marble. And so those clay pipe fragments are probably the type of, you find them on those long clay pipes. They call a yard of clay. So that was kind of interesting. But generally, like when you get back to the brass button for a minute, we thought of three possibilities. Probably not a military button, though it's possible. But the other possibility is, we had a member of the family who was the postman. And so when you look at postman outfits or jackets, they do have, the outer ones have brass buttons, but the other possibility is they had a local band. And so someone brought up the plausible possibility that it could come from a band uniform. So, and that was what was found inside the house. We then tested the exterior, the back door, and the addition. So out the back door, we found, aside from the stones that we found around that area, we also found a trash midden, and in the immediate test unit 8, we found the items that I put in the slide. At the top is a small piece of white ceramic, but it's a child teacup. So something that maybe they lost, left behind, got stepped on, or maybe just broke. We found a number of gutta percha buttons, including the 1843 gutta percha button, that black smoothed one that I put in the slide. And then the other was to show you yet another sample of small and large white buttons, and workman buttons. The last object that was found at the very bottom of the test unit was a single piece of black onyx. And initially I thought, necklace, something like that, but there was no evidence, like you can see in that, in the round setting, there's no evidence of a stone or something that was once there. And then when you look on the side of it, there's no hole or evidence of an attachment of any kind. So where does this leave us? Well, in some 19th century African-American communities, black onyx can be used to protect and absorb negative energy. Like hoodoo, it is used to give strength or for health. Therefore, it is an effective way to protect or to gain better health. In 1874, when Basil and Nancy first built their home, they were new to freedom. The fact that they had invested in land meant that they planned on farming, but they also took a big risk. The actions the Dorseys took showed that they were charting out a new path for their children and that they had hope for the future. But it is also reasonable to assume that the Dorseys would do everything in their power to ensure that their family would prosper in the future. And just to show you a few of the artifacts in the back, or in the addition rather, the small one all the way to the left side is as a small affiliation pin. We have yet to find an organization or a local organization that had the acronym ASA, but we are looking. The coverall or overall attachment that you see there is, we found several of those through the house. The bone-handled cutlery implement, knife or fork or spoon, had a green incised or inlaid design in it. It reminded me of the inexpensive green and white ceramics that we often find, whiteware ceramics. And then there was the brass cutlery has an incised, a stamp in it. But we only found 1 or 2 wire nails. So those suggested more repair rather than this is what we're building the house with. And these dated to 1880, not 1874 when the house was built. We didn't find I guess the other thing to clarify too is we found cut nails throughout the addition as well as the regular house. Moving on to the other artifacts that you see in front of you, there's the butchered bone on the butchered cow bone on one end, and the pig tooth was butchered in many pieces in the other slide. And last but not least, throughout the edition, we found many Gutta Percha buttons, mostly the plain, undecorated Gutta Percha buttons. But the one you see on the image there has a lily design. It reminded me of things that you would, I think of lilies, and I think of, their significance in funerals, but also they are decorative, highly decorative buttons. This one did not, this design on Gutta Percha buttons did not come out until 1890. So again, it fits firmly within when the Dorseys were living in the house. Could have been purchased to decorate your shirt or sweater, or it could have been used for one of their clients. So these are certainly things to consider. But let me think if there was something else. You can see the archaeologists and volunteers who came out. We had several interns who came out and helped us. And so I guess some of the concluding points for this presentation is that the Dorsey site, like the town, is about hope and change. Community archaeology projects like this one allow us to learn about how much the Sugarland residents worked and to change their lives by building a farm or building farms and teaching their children hope for a new future. We learned details in our research that define modern stereotypes, like the legal ownership of land by recently emancipated African-American women in 1874. Weaving the archaeology and ethnohistory, the interviews, and material culture studies together, we felt we came out with a stronger interpretation. We hope that by publishing both the Sugarland book and the K-12 teaching module, that generations learning about the Dorsey family and the Sugarland community will have a new perspective on what African-American families achieved and contributed to American society. So let me move down and to show you the book that Suzanne was talking about. Suzanne, do you want to share anything about the contents of the book?
Sure. Yes, the book is called, as I mentioned before, I Have Started for Canaan. The title came from an obituary that was listed in the 1880 church ledger that we were able to, that we have in our collection. The gentleman who helped us, Jeff Sipek, he helped us to write the book. He really, that title really, he really enjoyed that title. So we all agreed that that was a good one to start with. As I mentioned, it came out in 2020, and that's available for sale on our website. The part that's even more special to me is the fact that the picture that's on the front of the book is a picture of the community well, where everyone came until they were able to dig wells on their own properties. And the children that are all standing there are all my cousins, my mom, and aunts. So that's real special to me. And we were also able to have that picture in the African American Museum downtown. So Sugarland's a lot more important than a lot more notice, I shouldn't say important, a lot more notice than it has been because of the book and all of the work that Gwen had done before I even joined her on this project.
The picture in the well reminds me of how much that's a central point to come and get your water, but also the news of the day. Last but not least is when we raised money to do the archaeology project, we put in money so that we could create a virtual exhibit, get a virtual tour created. So Frameless Technology helped us with that, and then create this teaching module. In the teaching module, I, created one before using the Maynard Burgess House, a free African-American site in Annapolis. So I listed that below, but this one is, I listed the table of contents, your introduction to archaeology and preservation, the history, the archaeology, and then in each section is our readings and exercises for kids. And I listed our email so that if you're interested in any of this, you can get in touch with us. And last but not least, I want to say thank you very much to our volunteers. We couldn't have done this without help from everybody. And we had help from the teachers on the environmental ed group, Archaeological Society of Maryland, and then many interns and volunteers from both the community and from Montgomery College.